Hi, I'm Jennifer Ferguson with Artistic Painting Studio, and this video is an instructional video all on the art of glazing. And we're going to be talking about cabinetry glazing during this instructional video. So let's get started. The basics of starting with cabinetry is you're either going to have a cabinet door that has already been painted that you are redoing, or you're possibly going to start off with some brand new fresh cabinet doors. So the preparation is a little bit different for these two types of surface. If you are starting with some raw wood that has never ever been painted before, you're going to want to seal this wood, and there's a couple of products out there that are just called a wood sealer, or you might even find a primer that also is a wood sealer, so you can do it all in one. But if you're starting with a wood sealer, the wood sealer is basically a clear medium that is going to be 100% coverage, and what it's doing is sealing the wood so that no other moistures can penetrate and possibly warp the door. So it's to protect the wood itself, and it will raise the grain a little bit. So after you have sealed it with a wood sealer, you would have to come back and lightly sand. If you find a two-in-one product, again, it will raise the grain, but you're also getting a primer coat with sealing at the same time. And then once you've actually sealed the door, then you would be going on to your base coat, or like I said, if you if you've sealed the door first and then you're moving on to the primer, you do your primer next, and then you would go on to your base coat. I'm just one of those people that have always used a primer, so you'll have to forgive me. That's just one of the steps that I'm a firm believer in. I think it's always great to have something I know is going to have great adhesion, so it's going to stick to your substrate and give you a great surface to work on, so all of your other products are going to adhere as well. So if you are redoing a project, okay, so you're redoing your kitchen cabinets, you're basically going to end starting with something that already has a paint on here. I prefer to just sand the surface, so it's kind of a personal thing. I rather sand off as much as I can. Not always do I go down to the raw wood, but you want to break through whatever top coat or clear coat that was on there and give it a little bit of tooth. And if there was any chipping in the prior finish, you want to make sure that you've got that smoothed out so that you're not going to end up having that like telegraph through. So it's going to depend on the condition of the doors that you are actually working on and how much work you're going to have to put into the preparation of the project. But I want to make sure that I have something that's smooth, clean, and has a little bit of a tooth to it. Like I said, I wouldn't want to go directly over any of those finishes that are already on cabinetry, especially the ones that are coming like from the factory. You definitely need to sand and break through that surface so that you can get a little bite. Now, like I said, I prefer to sand the surface. There is always the option, if you've got layers and layers of paint and you want to go ahead and strip, you can definitely strip the finish off. And I know there's some more, I want to say, eco-friendly products out there. I think one of them is even called like Clean Strip. But at the end of this video, I'll definitely have a list of products that I recommend, and you can determine what is going to be the easiest way for you to start. We are going to start with this door here, and basically I've got it all cleaned up. I knew what was on here prior, so I don't feel like I need to go directly to a primer coat, because I know there's a primer coat underneath my previous finish, so that you would just go ahead and be able to start directly with your paint. Now there's tons and tons of paints out there to use. Oh my gosh, I'm sure it could be confusing, but if I'm going to do a glazed finish, I want my paint to be a satin finish, or at least an eggshell or satin finish. I wouldn't want to be using like a chalk paint that's going to give me a matte finish, because at that point that matte finish is going to be porous and is really not conducive to going forward with glazing. Okay, so I would recommend that you'd want to start with something that's going to give you that satin or eggshell finish. I'm actually going to be using the General Finishes product in this project, and this is their milk paint, but their milk paint is actually an acrylic based product, so it has really good adhesion, and plus it does dry to, I want to say, a low satin, probably somewhere between that eggshell and satin finish, so it's giving you a good substrate to start on for actually glazing. And I'm going to reposition the camera so that you can see what I'm doing, because I want you guys to see how I'm actually going to paint on the base coat. But before I do that, a couple of things as far as like picking the color. Okay, so these are General Finishes. I got Millstone out here, Antique White, okay, Millstone, and then I also had Linen. All three of these are different shades of, I would say, an off-white, with definitely being Antique White being the lightest. So this would give you a very light base coat, and will definitely keep you lighter in your entire process. So if you're looking for the color to be darker in the end, then you would choose a darker base coat. So if I was looking for an off-white that was definitely darker, so I'd want the cabinets to be darker, Millstone would be my choice. I kind of picked the middle of the road and went with Linen, because Linen is just a nice neutral off-white color that has a little bit of pigment but not too dark, okay? And I think this is a great way to start. And I'm going to show you a couple of doors here that'll give you an idea what I'm talking about with how that your base coat can affect your glaze colors. Okay, so I'm going to grab a couple of doors here. Forgive me here for a second, okay? Those were not as convenient as I thought they were. Okay, so this door here was painted in something very similar to the Linen that I'm actually using. And this door here, which is a darker color, this one was started with a darker base coat, so something closer to Millstone. So it will affect the way that the glaze, how dark the glaze is going to get. So you definitely want to choose your base coat color depending on how deep you want to get with your cabinetry. So it's always recommended that you create a sample to start with, whether it be on just a piece of molding, or just a piece, just even a piece of scrap wood, anything that you can actually test out your base color. You can test out your techniques. You can play with your glaze color, everything on it. So sample making is really important to me. And I think it's a very good idea to always make a sample first, so that way you know what direction you're going with all your different products, because you might want to test out even a couple of different base coats and a couple of different glaze colors to determine exactly what it is you are trying to create for your project, okay? So I'm going to put the camera down here for a second so you guys can see what I'm doing. This is the Lazy Susan that we've actually built. So we were able to purchase like the mechanism, and then we just created a little box for it, and it will spin so that when you are turning your doors around and painting on them, it's actually just a nice way to be able to spin the door and keep moving them around as you're painting. When you are base coating and glazing your doors, it's a system, and you want to stay in this system. There's a reason why we do things so, I want to say methodically, but you definitely want to make sure that you're not missing anything. So that's kind of why we stay into a whole system of painting in a certain direction when we're doing things. So there are a lot of brushes out there that you can use. So I'm going to pull my camera back up here for a second because I want to talk to you guys about brushes before I get going. Okay, I almost forgot about those. There are a lot of different brushes on the market, and this one's actually like a wax and paintbrush, so it can be used for either purpose. This one is actually by Chalk Supply, and again, it's supposed to be a paintbrush. Some of these are a little bit bigger, and I'm just one who kind of likes a smaller brush, but this one here, I believe, is by, okay, so again, it's for paint or liquid, okay, but it's pretty soft, okay. Even though it's soft, I always like to have my brush have a little bit of resistance to the bristles. And this one is like a really nice chip brush. So kind of depending on what you're doing, you might investigate into different brushes. But I hate to tell you that this is the brush that I'm going to most likely pick, okay? These are all referred to as a wash brush. They're soft as far as their bristles go, but they have resistance. So when you're trying to pull the paint and keep it smooth, the bristles are not going to just lay down. They're going to pull the paint and move it for you and then keep it very smooth. I'm always wanting to try to create as many layers as I can that I need to without having to sand in between. So I'm trying to prevent having to sand. So the smoother that I can actually put the paint onto the surface, the less sanding I might have to do in between the coats. So that'll give me the ability just to be able to move forward, okay? And, okay, let's grab a foam plate here. Okay, so I'm just going to use a foam plate. And I'm going to go ahead and reposition the camera again, okay, once again. So we're going to dish out. It's never a good idea to actually put your brush directly into a can of paint. You can contaminate the paint, and sometimes that'll just make it smell really funny, okay? And I know that this is, for as much paint as I've used out of that quart, it's almost gone. I've never dipped into the can because it's nice and fresh in there and the paint looks good. And that's one of the things that you can always tell. Now, I probably have pulled out more than I need. But I'm going to always put it onto some kind of another surface. I like the foam plates because I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of water. Okay, let me see what you can see what I'm doing here. This is just a water basin, okay, so it's like a brush holder. And so I've got a little bit of water in there, not a lot, okay? And that way I can mix it into my paint as needed if the paint is seeming like it's a little on the thick side. And because I'm out of probably the last quarter of the can versus the top quarter of the can, it seemed like it was a little bit thicker at this point. One other thing that I love to do before I get started, just in case I've missed cleaning off, is I'll just use a chip brush and brush off the surface and just make sure that there is nothing left in any of the crevices, okay? And that's always a nice thing to do, just make sure it's really, really clean before you get going there. So the first area that I'm always going to paint is going to be this lower recessed section, okay? And I'm always going to also be brushing in the direction that the wood grain, okay? So I'm not going to go sideways through here. I'm going to keep my brush going linear. And again, you're always wanting to brush in the direction of the wood grain and also the way that the door has been built. This will just create a nice, smooth, uniformed layer of paint underneath, okay? And like I said, being on this Lazy Susan, it allows that the door is already lifted up for you and then gives you the ability to move the door around, okay? So I'm just working on the lower recessed area and making sure that I got 100% coverage down here. And if you can turn your door around, it helps to be able to see all angles. The other thing is that when you are applying your first coat, I never expect to have 100% coverage or to have completely opaque coverage in one layer. So I'm basically just trying to get coverage and um, make sure that I have 100% coverage, but I'm not worried that if it doesn't look completely opaque, I'm always going to have in mind that I'm going to put on 2 layers of paint, okay? 2 layers of paint is going to give me a really nice substrate, and making sure I got 100% coverage and I've got really good coverage, okay? So never think of that you're going to do it in one coat. So always have in mind, if it doesn't look perfect, you know you're going to put on a second coat of paint. Okay, as I start working on the outside, so I worked on the recessed, I did the center panel, and now I'm going to work on the outside edge. And again, I want to paint this the way the door has been constructed and going with the grain of the wood. So I'm working on the corner right here, and then I'm going to come down the full side, full edge, okay? And try to create as many full brush strokes as you possibly can instead of doing something like that, because then you're going to have all these little start marks, okay, where the brush hits every time. So as long as your doors are not, you know, huge, you normally can go ahead and get continuous full brush stroke from end to end. And then always make sure that you're coming back on a corner area like this and cleaning it up, because it's really easy to get a little bit of paint like sitting puddled on the corners, okay? So as I move around, being right-handed, I'm always going to be turning counterclockwise so that my left hand can hold on to a dry area for now. And so now that I'm working on the bottom section, this is normally where there's a piece of wood that is put in between the 2 longer pieces. So I'm going to go completely across here, and then again bring the stroke back up on the corners, again painting it just like it was constructed. And I'm keeping my paint a little bit watered down just so that it stays smoother, and I'm painting the entire edge and side as I'm doing this. And then again, make sure that you don't have any paint puddled on your corners, because that seems to be where everybody kind of misses that area, and then you have to go back and sand that. So again, I'm always trying to make sure that I don't have to go back and sand anything if I can avoid it. And every time I paint a door, I do paint it in this system where I'm starting on the recessed area, finish out the center panel, and then work on the outside edge. And at least you have some place to hold onto everything until this very last section, okay? So now I'm basically going to hold on to whatever groove is on the back of the door and try to hold that with my fingertips. It does get a little challenging as you get to the last side. Okay, again, make sure that you've got nice smooth brush strokes. And I am keeping in mind that this might not be a perfect coat. Then I'm going to go ahead and paint 2 full coats on. So I'm not going to worry about that it's absolutely perfect. Okay, I just want 100% coverage. So after I've painted everything on, I'll normally lift the door up, okay? And this way I can definitely get this at my eye level and turn it around and check my corners and make sure that, let me lift this up again a little bit, okay? Just make sure that I haven't missed anything, and I can see a little bit better when it gets up to my eye level, and just check. Now the other thing is you'd want to run either your fingers along this edge, okay, because so you can see I picked up paint, okay, or even get like a damp rag and make sure that you don't have any paint on the other side of the door, because you're going to be flipping your doors over and getting both sides done. Now I've done the front of the door because that's all I'm going to do for this actual video, okay, but in the real world I always do the backs first, okay. I always try to put on 1 coat early in the morning, let the paint set for at least 4 to 5 hours during the day, put a second coat of paint on there, and let those sit overnight. And the first 2 coats would be the back, okay? So you're going to paint a coat on the back, let it sit 4 to 5 hours, paint another coat on the back, let it sit overnight, and then the next day you would actually flip them over and do the top side. The reason why I'm always doing that is I rather that the first 2 coats of paint, when it goes back on what we call a drying rack, or wherever you're going to lay it to dry, that it's sitting on the back, okay, once the front is done. And then again, before I'd flip this door or do anything to it, I'd let it dry overnight. That's just giving it really good dry time before you move on, okay? And dry time is really important with all your layers to make sure that you're not trying to go too fast and that you push something, okay? Okay, so I'm going to skip this door out of my way here so it can dry. And I have, let me put the camera back down for you guys, okay? I have my other cabinet door completely ready to go. This one has 2 full coats on here, so it is ready to actually glaze. So we're going to start talking about glaze, and I'm going to actually make a glaze for you guys. So I'm just going to move my Lazy Susan out of the way, and we're going to talk about some glazes. There are a lot of different glazes on the market, but these are the ones that I work with. So I'm using the Proceed brand, which is their full-bodied glazing medium. I also like working with Modern Masters, and this is their furniture glaze. And then I also have my own brand if you're working on a smaller project that if you don't need a quart, this is a really good glaze that you can get into a smaller quantity. For today, we're going to go ahead and just use my product here. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and work with mine. So let's pull out, I'm going to pull out some colors here. These are actual colorants, and they're all in the Umber family. So I have, okay, I don't need black. So I have Modern Masters colorants, and then I also have, oh, I guess those are all modern, because there also is Proceed colorants, okay? But this is black, and I don't want to go that dark. So I'm going to put that one out of the way. But they're all different umbers. So it's kind of deciding when I was saying that you really want to create a sample. I'm going to bring you guys back up here so you can see me here for a second. You really want to create a sample because every last one of these colors is a little bit different, and that's going to look different on top of the base coat color that you chose. So there's just a lot of different variations that can be created. And then not only can you use these different colors, but you can mix these colors together and create a custom glaze. So it even gets more and more confusing. So that's what I say, make a sample. I can't say enough great words about making a sample and trying to figure out exactly what it is you want to create. I think we're going to go ahead and go with a Van Dyke brand, and now we're going to go with Coffee Bean. Let's do Coffee Bean, okay? So I'm going to always shake these up first. Shaking up my glaze, okay? I'm going to pour in to another container, and I'm going to pour in about a half a cup, okay, or close to it. That'll give me enough glaze to do my project. And I do measure out my glaze, okay? So whatever recipe that you are playing around with and creating as far as your sample goes, if you have pre-measured out even the smallest amount, okay, so like we're only going to make a half a cup of glaze, if I've measured out how much colorant I've put in, I'll be able to duplicate this recipe in a larger volume for when I'm getting ready to actually do the entire kitchen or whatever the project is. My standard recipe is like a cup of glaze to approximately 3 tablespoons of colorant. So if I've got to only have a half a cup, I'm going to do at least, okay, my measuring spoons here seem like they got a little glitter on them, so you can tell that I use these, and I use them for a lot of things. So I'm going to go ahead and measure out at least 1 tablespoon of this color, okay? And this is the coffee bean. And I try to be pretty precise about it. That way I know that I can reproduce this exact recipe. Now, if I'm only using one color to create with, that's not, I mean, you know, having your recipe somewhat close will be good, but when you start getting into, you know, you're going to use some coffee bean and maybe you're going to use some Van Dyke brown and you're making a custom color, you want to make sure that you've got some really good notes so that you can reproduce that. Once I've mixed it up in the container, I'm going to smear a little bit out on this plate because we want to see how sheer the color is, okay? Because when you just brush it out, it looks like it's really dark, but once you shear it out like you're going to be doing with a glazing technique, you want to make sure that you have enough pigment, okay? That you're not losing all your pigment as you shear it down. And that's part of when I was talking about of how much colorant you're going to add to the glaze. The color's never going to become opaque. They're colorants versus being paint, so they're meant to tint. But we want to make sure that we have enough pigment to color our cabinet and get the intensity that we're looking for. So if I keep adding more color to this, I'm going to have, I want to say, a more intense color. It's not going to change the color. It's just going to be a little bit more intense instead of really sheer. So if I'd only added like maybe a half a tablespoon, I would have definitely a more sheer color to work with, okay? So I hope that makes sense. If not, you guys can always message me, okay? So a good middle of the road color is always just working with or starting with the recipe of 1 cup of glaze to 3 tablespoons of colorant. And depending on how sheer or how intense you want the color, you can adjust it from there. But you can always add less to start with and add more, okay, and continue to get the color more intense. It's easier to start with less and add than try to reverse it, because then you're just gonna have to add more glaze. But so our glaze, I believe, is ready to go. And I'm just gonna go ahead and get my door back out here and show you guys how we glaze everything. And okay, let's make sure that I brought everything back here I need it. And this is not my favorite chip brush to work with, but we will actually probably go ahead and use one of these other brushes, okay? A chip brush is probably my favorite tool to actually glaze with, and this one is actually a very long, nice chip brush, okay? So it's not your standard. Okay, I'm also going to glove up, and I always prefer to be gloved up when I'm working with my glazes because these colors can definitely stain your hands, get underneath your fingernails, and not look lovely here for a while. Okay, I'm going to reposition here so you guys can see exactly what I'm doing. And we're going to move a few things out of the way at the same time so that I can move around here. Okay, so we're going to again stay in the same system as far as how we're going to apply. We're going to put the glaze down into the recessed area first, okay? So we're going to brush it down here, and we'll make sure that we have 100% coverage. You can keep moving your door around. So my base coat, I had the 2 coats based on this door, okay? So the same color that you saw me apply. This door has 2 full coats of linen, and it was allowed to dry overnight, okay? I do not like to ever go forward on any type of paint without allowing it to have some really good dry time. And then I can just spin my door around as needed for application, okay? So once I have the recessed area all applied, I'm going to brush on this top center panel. And I am trying to put it on here kind of neat, okay? We don't need a lot of excess glaze. We don't need it going in every direction. So my application happens to be pretty neat, just like even painting on my base coat, okay? Everything is done here neat. And again, I'm going to go ahead and work on the first side and continue to spin it counterclockwise so I have some place to hold on. And this is a beautiful, rich color. This was the Coffee Bean by Modern Masters, which is just a really nice umber that has a golden hue to it. And like I said, if you don't like any of the colors straight out of the jar, that's kind of when we start mixing and matching and coming up with custom colors. And that's necessary when we're matching normally tiles and other things in the room. Okay, so once your door has complete coverage, let's see if I can make sure I got that in a good position for you guys to see. We're going to start using cheesecloth, okay? Cheesecloth, hopefully you can see this well, is sold on a bolt, okay? And it comes with 100 pieces on here. And as you pull them off the bolt, they are in these just little sheets, okay? So I like to put 2 of these pieces together and then fold it into like a little pad, okay, to work with. So you've got a nice smooth pad. I normally will have several of these pads put together before I get started because then they're ready to go and you're not having to do this once your door is glazed, okay? So glaze has what's called open time, and it's the reason we're using it for our color so that we can apply it to the surface and then have time to come back, manipulate it, distress it, take it away, and do other things with it. So it's not meant just to be brushed on and left. Okay, again, just like we brush this on to the lower section first, that's the first area that I'm going to wipe back, okay? And I'm going to come through here and wipe all areas. And I'm basically, what I'm just doing is wiping off the first layer of glaze, just kind of shearing it down. And I'm going to go around the whole door and shear it down. And I'm basically just trying to shear it off to about the same level completely, okay? So I'm not trying to make one area lighter than the other. I'm trying to just kind of take off that first level and shear it down a little bit. So once I've done that, the cheesecloth is going to be dirty. So I'm going to move over to a clean section of my pad, and now I'm going to start working down into the recessed area and start removing pretty much exactly where I want the door to shear down to, okay? And this is a personal thing at this point, okay? There's nothing wrong. There's no like wrong way to do this. It just depends on how much color you want to leave behind. You can almost pull off all the glaze. If you've got a good base coat down that has a satin finish, you can almost pull off all the glaze and shear it back down to the original color that it was painted. As you come in here and you clean up the corners a little bit, you might have to keep moving to a clean section of the cheesecloth, because as the cheesecloth gets dirty even just that much, it's going to want to redeposit that color back on, okay? So you have to kind of stay into a clean area of the cheesecloth. So depending on how much color, okay, I'm not wanting to wipe off all the color down into those nooks and crannies, because that's part of why I've put the glaze on, is I want it to set into those little recessed areas and create a dark little bead going around the door. Once I have cleaned out the lower area, then I'm going to go across the center panel and do this section next. And I'm basically just kind of doing a buffing motion, okay? You don't want to push really, really hard, because what that's going to actually do is push the glaze down into the paint, and then you're not going to be able to remove as much as you possibly want to, okay? So it really is just a light buffing, and it's not a bad idea to maybe leave it a little bit darker on the outside edges and pull a little bit more color off the center. But I'm trying to get to where I've got a nice even tone, meaning I'm not leaving something really dark and something really light, that there's a nice harmony and flow to everything. And I can always come back in here if I find that my cheesecloth left, you know, a little area that looks like it's a little bit of a mark, and come in here and clean out this area just a little bit more if I want to, okay? Like I said, there's nothing wrong, or no actual technique that is wrong as far as how dark you leave it. It's really a personal preference. So now I'm going to start onto the sides. And again, I'm going to glaze it just like I painted it. So I want to go all the way down the edges the way the door was constructed. And I'm not only going to get this edge, but I'm going to get all the way on the side too, okay? So I always treat the entire section as one, so I'm going to do the top and then the whole side. And again, I'm trying to shear this down to the same level that I've done the center panel, okay? I'm going to try to keep a very strong consistency and not have some area that is sheared off more than the other. Again, it's more of a buffing motion, okay? And as my cheesecloth is getting dirty and having a hard time finding clean area, I'm just going to move to a clean pad here, okay? So that I can control that a little bit more. And the nice thing is, if you are working with a really good glaze medium, you have time to do this. You don't have to feel like you've got to rush. So the two things that are working in your in the direction of how you want things to work is your base coat being a satin, eggshell or satin and finish, because that is allowing or not allowing the glaze to soak into the surface and allowing the glaze to sit on top and let you work with it and manipulate it. And also having a really good glaze that has a good open time, okay? And this is not going to be something you're going to find at a craft store, okay? You need to get into a more professional level of glaze that is going to give you a way better finished product, okay? And give you the ability to control. Because if your glaze isn't staying wet long enough, you don't have time to come back and do everything that I'm doing. You're not going to be able to come in here and smooth things out and lightly buff it and shear down your glaze a little at a time, and even be able to come back to the areas that I've already done and work them a little bit more. If your glaze is drying too fast, you don't have that ability. Okay, now I can tell that there's something that has like stuck into it. It looks like a little piece of fuzz from the cheesecloth. And I'm just going to show you one of my little tricks is to use a clean brush, okay? And just try to like pick that edge up, and then you can smooth it out if you've actually created any damage there. I'm going to angle this up a little bit so that you guys can see. Now I'm very happy with this. And again, I started with a medium value, I'd say, on my base coat, so that linen had some color. It wasn't like just barely off-white, it was off-white, so it had a nice warm off-white tone to it. And the glaze color I made was what I'd call a medium saturation, so even though that looks so dark, this is where it shears out to. But there's so much the variables of making sure that you're happy with everything, so that's why I was talking about always making a sample first. The next thing that you would want to do as you are working on the next door, okay, is you want to put this door, and I'm going to demonstrate this, okay? I'm going to grab a couple of my cans here because I want you guys to understand what I'm doing. This door needs to stay close by, and so I would put it on a couple of cans or put it on something right next to where I'm working. And I know that this is the one that I started with and showing you how to paint on the base coat. And I know it's not ready to go, but I want you guys to understand the technique here. As I am glazing this door, I want the first door right next to me, okay? It doesn't have to be this close, but as I start shearing it down, I want to make sure that I'm shearing down to the same level, that I'm not leaving this one darker or lighter, okay? So once I finish glazing this one, I'd actually take this one and go put it somewhere else where it can dry safely. And then I would be putting this one that I just finished over here, okay? That way it's still wet, and as the doors start to dry or the glaze starts to dry a little bit, you always want to have the last one that you did right next to you so that you keep a consistent hand, because if you're not seeing the level of sheerness that you've created right next to you, you might easily make that too dark or too light, okay? So I'm going to bring me back up here so you guys can see me talk. And that's just a trick that we have done for years. You always want the last door that you worked on right next to you. Not that you can damage it, keep it far enough away that you're not going to sling glaze onto it or hit it, okay? But you want to see that, okay? Because if I'm not seeing that level of sheerness, I will automatically probably go too light or too dark, and all of a sudden we're starting to get the doors where they're drying and they're not the same color, okay? Some are lighter and darker. So that's a really, really good hint. The last thing is, because glaze has such great open time, you want to let your glaze dry no less than 24 hours. Most of the time we're going to let the glaze dry a couple of days, and that way it's drying down nice and hard, and then go for your top coat. Now, top coat's another personal preference as far as what sheen you want. There's everything from matte to gloss, and there's no wrong direction to go. I think it's just, all again, it's personal preference. I happen to be one who likes most of my top coats, I want to say a low satin. I think it richens up the color with just that satin finish on there, but it's not going to be too shiny in the end and make you look like you have a glossy kitchen or whatever piece of furniture you might be working on, because the same techniques will work on furniture, cabinetry. They all work. It works. It's the same technique to work on cabinetry or furniture. Also depending on the use of the piece, I'm probably going to put no less than about probably 3 coats of top coat on there, okay? I want to make sure I'm protecting my work and protecting it really well so that I don't ever have to go back and repair anything. I think that's pretty much it, you guys. It takes a little practice, and I do, again, I'm going to stress the fact about making a sample. Even if you make a couple of sample doors just for fun so that you get familiar with the technique and staying into the system of wiping it off consistently the same way. I thank you guys very much for joining me, and there will be a PDF file available with this that'll have a list of all the products. You guys have a blessed day.